So we'll begin this process by going line by line, JPR by JPR, to familiarize you with the expectations of each job performance requirement in order to get you a passing grade on your state practical exam. So we'll start at the beginning. Like we mentioned in our intro to the JPR video, these are accessed through the Colorado Division of Fire Prevention and Control's website. So you can either access that by clicking that link on your D2L portal or just with a quick Google. But the state's website has all of these available, always with the most up-to-date version. And once you get to your operations level JPRs, you're going to be met with this table of contents listing 1 through 8. This tutorial is going to take you through a verbal explanation of JPR number 1, emergency decontamination. You'll notice, like we mentioned in the intro video, that this is listed as a mandatory. So you know that you're going to get 2 mandatories and 3 randoms, as listed up here for your initial certification JPR requirements. Those 2 mandatories are knowns. You walk in the door knowing that you're going to do emergency decontamination of some kind, and you're going to do an SDS. The SDS will be covered in a later video, but initially I want to take you through the paperwork side of the emergency decontamination station. This will be accompanied later on by a video demonstration of us actually performing emergency decon. But this will just hit the line items of the JPR to make you successful. So we'll scroll down. Hazmat Ops 1 lists the standard, always 472 for hazmat, and the task. Simply demonstrate the ability to perform emergency decontamination. Now your proctors may develop a scenario, or it may be a straightforward demonstrate how to decon somebody with emergency procedures and some verbal explanation. It's up to the discretion of the proctor, but you know the 7 requirements that are going to have to be met, regardless of the scenario put to you. So always remember, don't commit any safety violation. You'll do this in a team. That team could be of 2, of 3, of 4, but at least 2. And you'll demonstrate the ability to perform emergency decontamination. Now, always worth reviewing your definitions in your coursework, the difference between emergency decontamination and technical decontamination. We can cover that in a different session, but always remember that we're dealing in this case with emergency decontamination. So that scenario where somebody was exposed and we need to get them out right now. It could be a civilian who's not wearing any protective gear. It could be one of us, a rip in a suit, a failure of an air pack or of our gear, any scenario they want to throw at you. This is the hasty, expedited, get somebody out right now and do a rapid decontamination. Technical decontamination is a different thing, so it's worth getting back in your books, asking your instructors before test day to clarify that if you're unclear on what emergency decontamination means. So as always, the equipment required is going to be listed. You'll be in your PPE, which will be bunker gear and SCBA for an operations level test. We won't be putting you in level A suits or level B suits more than likely. It's going to be bunker gear and SCBA. There could be a water supply and hoses, and you'll be given some sort of product name. So the task steps, this is where we get into the meat of it. You'll notice that there's only 7. They're very straightforward. My best advice on any JPR is to accompany any skill you do with a verbal explanation of what you're doing. Remember that this is a test, and there's always the potential that your proctor, if they don't see it, then it didn't happen. So don't leave yourself open to that possibility. So we'll go through step by step. Step number 1, identify the contaminated person. When you get to the skill station, you'll be given a scenario, or you'll be given an explanation by your proctor. You won't simply be thrown into a situation where you're not aware of who you're addressing. So in a lot of ways, your proctor will be identifying that contaminated person. Say it anyway. Walk in and say, I've identified my 1 person, my 2 people, whatever the scenario warrants. I've identified somebody who's been contaminated. And number 2, we're going to remove that person from the threatened area. So you're going to perform that skill. It may be simply moving them down a hall, moving them across a parking lot, moving them from one room to another, depending on the situation you're given by the proctor. Even though you're performing this, it warrants saying it as well. Say, I've identified my contaminated person. I'm going to get them away from this threatened area. More than likely, you're going to be given somebody who's ambulatory, meaning they can walk on their own power. So it may be as simple as just telling them, sir, ma'am, come with me. Let's get you out of this area. Once they've been removed, you'll note that number 3 is immediately begin flushing with copious amounts of water. The only caveat to this could be if you're given a dry decon situation, but more than likely you're going to be given something that involves a water supply. And that will be lined out by your proctor before you walk in, so that won't be left to chance. But let's assume that you're doing a water decon. The plan is you're going to douse that exposed area with copious amounts of water. That's always a good catch-all for any of these JPRs. If it says copious amounts of water, use that same verbiage. Once you've done that hasty wash down to remove the bulk of those contaminants on the person, a big one that can be a failure point is avoiding cross-contamination. Say it, because it's never a bad idea to say it, but absolutely perform it. Don't say it and then start walking in the gear you're still wearing across the hall, because now you have cross-contaminated. So verbalizing doesn't save you from having to perform the function. It just gives you that double assurance that the proctor knows that you know your stuff. So when we talk about cross-contamination, we're saying don't take that material that's likely still on the person in some amount. Even though we've washed them off, there's still a trace amount. We don't want to take that elsewhere and risk infecting other people, exposing other people rather. So next is remove the victim to a clean area. Now, between 4 and 5, the plan may be to get the person out of their gear. Now that's something we'll demonstrate in subsequent videos and something that you'll need to get some hands-on with. But understand that when we're talking about cross-contamination, if they're in dirty gear, we want to leave that dirty gear there. So we're going to take them out of their gear in a systematic way that'll be demonstrated later. And the last step is removing that respiratory protection, so taking that mask off their face. Once we've removed as much contamination as possible by, for one, flushing with copious amounts of water, and additionally removing their gear or anything that might risk cross-contamination, we want to take that victim to a clean area. That could be simply to another room, that could be to an ambulance for further assessment, that could be to another clean area for further decon, but we want to remove them into a cleaner area. From there, this may be a verbalize piece of this on your test day, but we want to inform medical personnel of the contaminant. So we want to identify what it is if possible, and we want to identify people who have been contaminated or exposed to medical personnel. Now 5 and 6, I like to lump those together. If I'm the one taking the test, I like to throw out that we're going to move them to an ambulance or to a triage area. That's accomplishing the goal of moving them to a clean area, but also addressing the medical personnel component. And then one last thing that you always want to verbalize is securing that scene and maintaining evidence. Because this exposure, there's going to be additional steps to this incident, if this was a real world incident. So always verbalize those last few steps. You don't want to knock 1 through 6 out of the park and then potentially fail the station because you didn't verbalize the last step. So that's an overview of JPR number 1. Like I mentioned before, we'll do an accompanying video where we'll actually demonstrate the skill, which you will have exposure to in the class if you haven't already. And we'll have some reps in performing, but we'll give you a visual aid as well to accompany this. This is just an overview of the JPR itself and those critical criteria in order to make you successful.